He was a widowed carpenter, drowning in debt. She was a ruthless tech billionaire, ruling a global empire from the shadows. When she finally revealed her darkest secret to "I'm in a wheelchair," his next move didn't just break the rules. It rewrote both their lives forever. The smell of sawdust and stale coffee was David Miller's perfume, and exhaustion was his shadow. At 34, David was a single father, raising a 7-year-old girl, Lily, while trying to keep his custom woodworking business from going under. The crushing medical debt left behind by his late wife's battle with leukemia had reduced his life to a precarious balancing act. Every month was a war against past due notices. So when Miller Custom Woodworks received an invitation to bid on a multi-million-dollar renovation project in Atherton, California, the wealthiest zip code in the United States, David thought it was a clerical error. The client was Victoria Hastings, the notoriously reclusive 31-year-old CEO of Hastings Global, a massive venture capital and tech logistics conglomerate. Forbes called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley. She had orchestrated the hostile takeovers of 3 Fortune 500 companies before she was 30. She was brilliant, ruthless, and completely untouchable. David drove his battered Ford F-150 up the winding oak-lined driveway of her massive estate on Valparaiso Avenue. The house wasn't just a mansion, it was a fortress of steel glass and imported Italian marble. He was there to present his design for a massive 2-story private library. When David was escorted into her office by a severe-looking executive assistant named Beatrice, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria Hastings was situated behind a massive, monolithic desk carved from a single slab of black walnut. She was strikingly beautiful, but her features were set in a mask of absolute indifference. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back into a severe twist. She didn't stand to greet him. She didn't even offer a hand. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice smooth, but entirely devoid of warmth. She glanced at the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist. "You have exactly 7 minutes to convince me why a small-time contractor from Oakland is equipped to handle a $2 million architectural installation." David swallowed his nerves, unrolling his blueprints on the edge of her desk. "Because, Miss Hastings, the corporate firms you've interviewed see wood as a building material. I see it as a living thing. Your current architect's design is sterile. It belongs in a corporate lobby, not a home. You need warmth. You need acoustics that absorb the echo of a room this size." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I don't pay you to have opinions on my emotional comfort, Mr. Miller. I pay you to build what is on the blueprint." With respect, David countered his protective instinct over his craft, flaring up. "If you want a sterile glass box, hire a metal worker. If you want a sanctuary, you let me round these edges and use reclaimed Honduran mahogany." The room fell dead silent. Beatrice, the assistant, looked as though David had just detonated a grenade. No one spoke to Victoria Hastings like that. Board members of multi-billion-dollar corporations cowered before her. Victoria stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Her piercing blue eyes searched his face, looking for the usual subservience or intimidation. She found neither, just a tired, resolute father who knew his worth. "The Honduran mahogany," she finally said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "Can you source it by the end of the month?" "Yes," David said. "Then the contract is yours. Do not disappoint me, Mr. Miller." For the next 6 weeks, David practically lived at the Atherton estate. He and his small crew worked grueling 12-hour days. Yet in all that time, David noticed something deeply peculiar about Victoria Hastings. She was always there working from her home office, but she never moved from behind that massive black walnut desk. Whether David arrived at 6 a.m. or left at 8 p.m., She was seated in the exact same position, reviewing contracts, barking orders into a headset, or staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her meals were brought to her. Her executives flew in to meet her there. David assumed it was the ultimate power play. The CEO who demands the world come to her. He found her intimidating cold and entirely alien to his world of scraped knuckles and scraped-together pennies. But he also caught fleeting moments that didn't fit the Ice Queen narrative. He noticed the classical music playing softly from her office late at night. He noticed that she never rushed his crew demanding perfection, but paying every invoice the exact day it was submitted, a rarity in his business. The wall between them was absolute, until the Saturday that Lily came to work. It was a rainy Saturday morning. David's usual weekend babysitter had cancelled at the last minute due to a family emergency. Facing a critical deadline on the library's spiral staircase, David had no choice but to bring Lily to the estate. He set her up in the grand foyer with her colouring books, a tablet, and strict instructions not to wander. "You stay right here, Bug," he told her, kissing the top of her head. "Daddy's going to be in the next room. Do not go exploring." For 3 hours, Lily was an angel. But a 7-year-old's curiosity is a powerful force, especially in a house that looks like a modern-day castle. David was halfway up a scaffold, securing a heavy crossbeam, when he looked down and realized the foyer was empty. The coloring books were abandoned. Panic seized his chest. A house this size was filled with hazards, unfinished construction, heavy tools, sheer drops. "Lily!" he called out, scrambling down the scaffolding. He ran through the hallways, his heart hammering against his ribs. He checked the kitchen, the dining room, the east wing. Nothing. Finally, he noticed the heavy double oak doors to Victoria's private office were slightly ajar. David froze. He knew how ruthlessly Victoria guarded her privacy. If Lily had interrupted a multi-million-dollar international conference call, his contract and his lifeline would be terminated instantly. He pushed the door open, the apologies already forming on his lips. "Ms. Hastings, I am so incredibly The words died in his throat. The scene before him was entirely unexpected. Lily was standing near a towering, built-in bookshelf that David's crew had finished the week prior. She was pointing up at a beautiful leather-bound first edition of Alice in Wonderland, resting on the 3rd shelf. Victoria Hastings was not sitting behind her massive monolithic desk. She was in the center of the room, positioned in a sleek, custom-built carbon fiber tie-light wheelchair. David stood completely paralyzed in the doorway. He blinked his brain, struggling to process the image. The formidable billionaire, the woman who commanded global supply chains, was entirely paralyzed from the waist down. Her legs, clad in immaculate designer trousers, were motionless on the footrests. At that exact moment, Victoria was straining awkwardly, reaching her arm up toward the shelf to get the book for Lily. But the wheels of her chair had become deeply bogged down in the thick, luxurious pile of an antique Persian rug. She was stuck, unable to get close enough to the shelf, and her fingers were grasping at empty air just inches below the book. Hearing David enter, Victoria snapped her head around. The look on her face broke David's heart. The impenetrable mask of the Ice Queen shattered entirely. In its place was a look of stark, agonizing vulnerability, followed immediately by deep defensive humiliation. She dropped her arm, her hands gripping the push rims of her wheels so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked at David, her jaw tight, her eyes blazing with a mixture of defiance and shame. She braced herself for the reaction she had seen 1,000 times since the accident 3 years ago. The gasp, the pitying head tilt, the awkward stammering apologies, the sudden shift in how a man looked at her, transforming her from a formidable woman into a broken, fragile tragedy. "Sorry, I'm in a wheelchair," Victoria said. The words were sharp, coated in ice, designed to push him away before he could pity her. David didn't gasp. He didn't avert his eyes. He didn't offer a suffocating blanket of apologies. Instead, he took a breath, his heart steadying. He walked slowly across the room. He didn't look at her legs. He looked directly into her eyes. He walked past her, reached up, and pulled the leather-bound book from the shelf. He handed it down to Lily. "Here you go, Bug. Say thank you to Ms. Hastings, and then head back to your colouring. I need to talk to her." "Thank you, Ms. Hastings," Lily chirped, happily, hugging the book and skipping out of the room, completely oblivious to the heavy tension in the air. David turned back to Victoria. She was staring at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly, waiting for the pity to drop. David's next move changed everything. He didn't speak. He simply crouched down, dropping to one knee right beside her wheelchair. Victoria flinched, slightly startled by his proximity. David reached out and firmly grasped the front caster wheel of her chair, lifting it slightly from the thick fibers of the Persian rug. He inspected the titanium fork. "The caster is jammed," David said, his voice calm, steady, and completely matter-of-fact. "This is a beautifully balanced frame, aerospace-grade titanium, right? But these casters, they're meant for hardwood or concrete. This Tabriz rug is horn-knotted, incredibly dense pile. The fibers are wrapping around the bearing." Victoria stared at the top of his head, completely stunned. "What?" she whispered. David looked up at her, still kneeling, resting his forearm casually on his knee. "I'm saying your interior designer is an idiot. You can't put a high-pile silk rug in the middle of your primary workspace. It's an engineering flaw. I can build you a custom hardwood transition ramp here, flush with the floorboards, so you don't get bogged down when you move away from the desk." He didn't see a tragedy. He saw a mechanical issue. He treated her not as a patient, but as a person navigating an environment that was poorly designed for her. The tight defensive knot in Victoria's chest, a knot she had carried for 3 agonizing years, suddenly loosened. A single betraying tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, but David saw it. You aren't going to ask," Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly. "Ask what?" David replied softly, standing back up to his full height. "What happened to me?" "Ms. Hastings," David said, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm a carpenter. My job is to fix the house, not pry into the foundation unless I'm invited. If you ever want to tell me, I'll listen. But right now, my only concern is getting this rug out of your way." Victoria looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. The dust on his jeans, the calluses on his hands, the deep, soulful empathy in his brown eyes. He was the first person in 3 years who hadn't treated her like a piece of broken glass. "Victoria," she said quietly. David blinked. "Excuse me. My name is Victoria. Not Ms. Hastings. Not when we're alone." She took a deep breath, the iron posture returning, but this time it was authentic strength, not a defensive wall. "And I would appreciate that hardwood transition, David." That evening, as David was packing up his tools, Beatrice walked into the foyer. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Hastings requests that you and Lily join her for dinner in the main dining room." She had the chef prepare macaroni and cheese. "From scratch," David smiled, looking toward the hallway. "Tell Victoria we'd be honored." The dinner was a revelation. Away from the corporate masks, Victoria was funny, fiercely intelligent, and surprisingly warm. She patiently listened to Lily babble about her school projects, treating the child with a quiet reverence. David watched the way the heavy ambient lighting of the dining room caught Victoria's features. He realized with a sudden jolt that he was intensely attracted to her, not to her wealth, not to her power, but to the survivor sitting across from him. As Lily dozed off on the sofa after dinner, David and Victoria shared a glass of Cabernet. "It was a car accident," Victoria said, suddenly staring into the ruby liquid in her glass. The crackling of the fireplace was the only other sound in the room. 3 years ago, Pacific Coast Highway. I was coming back from a board meeting in Los Angeles. David stayed quiet, letting her lead. "They told the press it was a slick road," she continued, her voice hardening, the shadows dancing across her face. "Hydroplaning. A tragic accident." She looked up, her blue eyes locking onto David's, suddenly burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "But it wasn't an accident, David. The brakes on my Aston Martin were cut. Someone on my board of directors tried to murder me, and I'm about to prove who it was." The air in the room went dead. David felt a cold chill run down his spine as he realized that the fortress of Atherton wasn't just a home, it was a bunker, and he had just stepped onto the battlefield. The fire in the Atherton mansion crackled, spitting a rogue ember against the glass screen. David sat perfectly still, processing the gravity of Victoria's confession. She wasn't just a billionaire recovering from a tragedy. She was a target who had been hunted, and the predator was still in her inner circle. "Who?" David asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. He didn't offer empty platitudes or express shock. He treated the information with the tactical precision it required. Victoria turned her wheelchair slightly, her fingers tracing the armrest. "Harrison Caldwell, my chief operating officer. After my father died, Harrison was supposed to be my mentor. Instead, he spent 5 years embezzling from our offshore logistics accounts. When I caught the discrepancies and ordered an independent audit, the brakes on my Aston Martin mysteriously failed." David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "If you know it was him, why are you sitting in this house instead of handing the evidence to the district attorney?" Because the evidence was on a secure, physical server inside the Hastings Global Headquarters in San Francisco, Victoria explained, her jaw tightening. "Harrison locked me out of the building. He cited my medical fragility to the board, taking over day-to-day operations. He controls the security, the sweeping protocols, the physical access. If I send someone in, he destroys the drives. If I go to the FBI without the hard proof, his lawyers will spin it as the paranoid delusions of a traumatized, disabled woman. He's been laying the groundwork for a psychiatric hold for a year, whispering to firms like Sequoia Capital and Goldman Sachs that I have lost my mind." She looked at the heavy oak double doors of her office. "I need to get back into that boardroom. I need to bypass his security sweeps and extract the data during the annual shareholder vote next Friday. But Harrison has the room swept for electronic bugs daily. Nothing gets in." David looked at the dense, beautiful wood paneling he had installed in her library. He rubbed the calluses on his palms, a slow realization dawning on him. "Wood is porous, Victoria," David said quietly. "It breathes. It has cavities. And if you know how to shape it, it can hide almost anything." Victoria's eyes locked onto his. "What are you suggesting?" "Harrison Caldwell just commissioned a new conference table for the executive boardroom," David said. "My company was on the short list to build it before I took your library contract. If I call the procurement office tomorrow and underbid the competition, I can build that table." He stood up, pacing the length of the Persian rug that had trapped her earlier. "Harrison sweeps for bugs, but he sweeps the room, the electronics, the drywall. He won't sweep a solid slab of custom-milled Macassar ebony, because X-rays and standard RF detectors struggle against dense, 3-inch thick hardwood, lined with a custom lead resin composite. I can build a hollow, shielded cavity directly under his seat. You give me the extraction hardware, and I will embed it into the table. All you have to do is show up, sit at the head of the table, and press a hidden trigger beneath the bevel." Victoria stared at him, the cold, calculating CEO mingling with genuine awe. "David, if he catches you, he won't just fire you. These people paid a mechanic to cut my brake lines. They will kill you." "I'm sending Lily to my sister's house in Denver tomorrow morning," David replied without hesitation. "She's safe. And I'm a contractor, Victoria. People like Harrison Caldwell don't look at guys in work boots. To them, we're part of the furniture." For the next 10 days, the Hastings estate transformed from a construction site into a war room. David secured the bid for the boardroom table. He sourced a massive raw slab of Macassar ebony, a dark, heavily striped wood that was incredibly dense and heavy. Inside his Oakland workshop, working under the cover of night, he carefully routed a hidden channel into the underside of the table. Victoria's private security tech provided a military-grade data siphon, a device no larger than a deck of cards that could wirelessly clone Caldwell's encrypted drives if activated within a 10-foot radius. David encased the device in a lead-lined resin, sealing it perfectly, flush inside the ebony. He carved a microscopic pressure switch into the wood grain at the head of the table, running a hairline wire down the table's heavy iron legs. It was a masterpiece of carpentry and espionage. The physical toll was immense. David barely slept, functioning on black coffee and adrenaline. But every night he returned to Atherton. He and Victoria pored over the blueprints of the Hastings Global Building. They ate takeout over the blueprints, their shoulders brushing the air between them, thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the corporate coup. One evening, 48 hours before the board meeting, David was installing the hardwood transition ramp in her office. Victoria rolled over it, the titanium wheels gliding silently and effortlessly across the threshold. She stopped, looking down at the flawless craftsmanship. Then she reached out and took David's sawdust-covered hand. Her grip was strong. "When this is over," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I am going to owe you my life. But I want you to know, this isn't a transaction for me." David looked into her eyes, seeing the woman who had fought her way back from the brink of death. He knelt down, leveling his gaze with hers, and gently squeezed her hand. "It was never a transaction, Victoria. Now let's go take back your company." Friday morning in San Francisco was draped in a thick, wet fog. On the 42nd floor of the Hastings Global Tower, the atmosphere was equally suffocating. The executive boardroom smelled of expensive leather and polished ebony. David's custom table dominated the space, a massive dark monolith. Around it sat 12 board members, all men in tailored suits, murmuring in hushed tones. At the head of the table stood Harrison Caldwell. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his cold, predatory eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell began, his voice projecting authority, "we are here to vote on a necessary, if painful, transition. Victoria Hastings has been absent for 3 years. Her medical condition has left her unable to fulfill her fiduciary duties. For the survival of this company, I am calling for a formal vote of no confidence to permanently transfer the title of CEO to myself." The board members nodded slowly. It was a done deal. Then the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. The room fell dead silent. Victoria Hastings entered. She wasn't hidden behind a desk. She was driving her carbon fiber wheelchair with smooth, commanding precision. She wore a tailored crimson blazer that practically bled power in the sterile grey room. Her posture was ironclad, her chin high. Flanking her was David, dressed in a simple dark suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He pushed the door shut behind them. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. "Good morning, Harrison," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. She rolled forward, stopping exactly at the head of the table, the spot Caldwell had just vacated in his shock. Caldwell recovered quickly, his face twisting into a patronizing mask. Victoria, this is a surprise. We weren't aware your health permitted travel, but I'm afraid this is a closed executive session. I am the majority shareholder and the chief executive officer of this company. Victoria interrupted her tone, dropping the temperature in the room. And I am taking my seat. She maneuvered her chair effortlessly to the head of the table. She placed her hands flat on the cool, polished ebony. Her right index finger found the exact groove David had carved into the wood grain. She pressed down. A microscopic click echoed beneath the heavy timber. The hidden data siphon powered on. Victoria, be reasonable. Caldwell sighed, leaning over the table, trying to use his physical height to intimidate her. You are in a wheelchair. You haven't been in the trenches for years. The company needs strong, capable leadership. The company needs a leader who doesn't pay a mechanic in Oakland $50,000 to cut brake lines, Victoria said evenly. The boardroom erupted in gasps. Caldwell's face drained of color, his patronizing smile vanishing instantly. That is an absurd, defamatory lie. You're unhinged, Victoria. This proves you are unfit. Does it? Victoria asked. Underneath the table, a tiny green LED flashed. The siphon was actively bypassing Caldwell's encrypted laptop, pulling the hidden ledgers and the wire transfer receipts that Caldwell had foolishly kept on his local drive as leverage. David stood silently against the wall, watching the progress bar on a modified phone in his pocket. 60%. 80%. 100%. David caught Victoria's eye and gave a sharp, single nod. Victoria pulled her hands back from the table. I have just completed a wireless extraction of the encrypted partition on your hard drive, Harrison. It contains the offshore accounts you've been using to drain Hastings Global, as well as the dark web communications with the men who tampered with my car. Caldwell panicked. He lunged across the table, grabbing for his laptop. Security, get this madwoman out of here. Before the boardroom guards could move, the double doors blew open again. This time, it wasn't corporate security. It was the FBI, led by agents from the Department of Justice's White-Collar Crime Division, accompanied by local San Francisco police. Harrison Caldwell. The lead agent barked, flashing a badge. Step away from the computer. You're under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. Chaos swallowed the boardroom. Caldwell stammered, fighting, as the agents cuffed him, his eyes wild with rage, as he stared at Victoria. Victoria didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still in her chair, watching the man who had tried to bury her be dragged out in handcuffs. The remaining board members sat frozen in their seats, staring at her in sheer terror. Victoria turned her chair, slowly addressing the room. The vote of no confidence is cancelled. We have a lot of work to do, gentlemen. I expect you all in my Atherton office on Monday morning at 8 sharp. She turned her wheelchair and rolled toward the exit. David opened the door for her, a small, proud smile touching the corners of his mouth. 6 months later, the Atherton estate was no longer a fortress of solitude. The heavy, suffocating silence of the mansion had been replaced by the chaotic, joyful sounds of life. Lily was running across the hardwood floors, chasing a golden retriever puppy that Victoria had adopted. David was in the library, standing near the custom Honduran mahogany shelves. He was inspecting the finish, wiping away a speck of dust. The room was warm, filled with light and the deep, rich acoustics that only living wood could provide. The soft hum of tires on hardwood approached. Victoria rolled into the library. She wasn't wearing a severe corporate blazer. She wore a soft, oversized cashmere sweater, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked completely at peace. She rolled over the seamless transition ramp David had built for her, coming to a stop beside him. She reached out, sliding her hand into his. David looked down at her, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. The table at HQ holding up. he asked, a teasing glint in his eye. Flawlessly. Victoria smiled, looking up at him. Though the new board members are terrified of it. They think I have the whole building bugged. Good. David laughed softly. He leaned down, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead, then to her lips. Victoria Hastings had lost her legs to a monster's greed, but she had refused to lose her empire. And in the process of rebuilding her throne, she had found a man who didn't see her chair as a tragedy, but simply as the vehicle she used to conquer the world. David and Victoria's journey proves that true strength isn't about standing tall. It's about having the courage to keep moving forward when life shatters your foundation. If this story of resilience, corporate justice, and finding love in the darkest moments inspired you, please hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never give up, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories every single week. Dan Sachen Han Vat Chin, David Miller, Victoria Hastings, Harrison Caldwell.